Do you remember what it was like as a child to learn your first language? Do you remember the hours spent stumbling over words, trying and failing to grasp simple linguistic concepts, years of developing the basic foundations and still not quite being certain? No, you probably don't. In actual fact, the struggles I just described are a more accurate description of the realities of learning a language now, as an adult.
The Out of Our Minds project is all about making second language learning more natural. So as you know, the vast majority of children learns their first language without much problem. And the majority of the world's population speaks at least 2 languages. But many people find learning a foreign language in the classroom extremely hard. There has been research that looks into why this might be the case, and colleagues have made changes to how languages are taught and what the context is in which people learn languages in the classroom. So for example, they have tried to make the instruction much more interactive with a focus on communication, on task-based learning, but that doesn't really resolve the problem. And what we here at Out of Our Minds are trying to do is looking at what exactly we expect the learners to learn and what exactly we expect the teachers to teach. So as things are now, we very much rely on a linguistic approach when we teach foreign languages, especially when we teach languages that are considered to be very difficult, such as, for example, the Slavic languages like Polish or Russian that have loads and loads of different forms for every verb, for every noun that need to be memorized. And we try to help the students by giving them a system that linguists have devised. Unfortunately, this seems to make the situation only harder for those students because then they have to memorize the whole archaic system of rules and exceptions before they can actually start to speak. I tend to call this process the Legofication of language. So we give our students what we consider to be the building blocks of the language they are trying to learn. We give them words, which are, the little Lego bricks if you want, and we give them rules, which you can compare to the booklet that comes with your Lego ship that you want to build. And then we train them in reading those instructions and putting the blocks together so that they form the desired result. But of course, this process is not very natural. You don't build a Lego ship in an instant, and that is exactly what face-to-face communication requires. So you can't really take the time to look up in your manual how to put word A and word B together to give you the sentence that you want.
Hola, ¿cómo estás?
You want to be able to produce your results really very fast. You want to produce them automatically and with little error if possible.
Muy bien. Oh.
The process that we give to our students is a very slow and painful process that requires a lot of attention and isn't really suited for use in everyday fast conversations. So with Out of Our Minds, we're trying to change what we teach our students, what we expect them to learn.
I think in general, the idea is to try and identify what types of linguistic knowledge native speakers of a language have and acquire as they learn their language, which we do using computational simulations mostly that we then check with native speakers. And from these results, like from our analysis of what it is that L1 speakers know, we try to create shortcuts or at least good strategies for L2 learners to apply these types of knowledge as well and trying to improve the way they learn the language.
Kind of when we wrote the project at the time, of course, the focus was on interesting combination of 2 reasonably different languages. They are both European, but they belong to different language groups. So you have Germanic English versus Slavic Polish. And those are huge speaking communities within Britain. And from that perspective, it's also it must have practical value to research those 2 languages. And things that appear to be very difficult for second language learners, be that Polish native who tries to learn English or English native who tries to learn Polish. And there are some interesting phenomena that are apparently very simple, very frequent, but at the same time very difficult to learn in your adult age?
I think out of Mind's research in trying to find out what learning behaviors and what is in our mind, because what we think is the cognitive processes can be a very abstract word, but we can learn how people learn language and what people think while they are learning language according to different research methods. So we are trying to figure out what they learn and what underneath their learning behavior, what they are thinking when they do their language learning processes.
We've all heard about Pavlov's dog. We know that Pavlov used to ring a bell and then the dog would get food. After a while, when the dog heard the bell, it started salivating before the food will even arrive, because he had learned to associate the sound of the bell with the coming of the food. It turns out our brains work exactly the same. We also salivate when we hear a bell if we know that food is coming. And we can actually translate this principle of learning into learning languages. What is actually happening is you got what's called a cue and an outcome. In the case of Pavlov's dog, you have the bell being the cue and the food being the outcome. Therefore, there is a response happening from the dog. When it comes to language...
All right, so this translates into language in the sense that we also have cues and outcomes in language. For example, an outcome that you could be looking for is a specific verb in a specific context. So depending on the context, you want to choose a specific verb. For example, if we take begin and start, you need to know in which context to use begin and in which context you can use start. In order to know this, you need to identify which cues are relevant. So what we do as linguists is that we look at a lot of data, so corpus data, and then we run this through machine learning simulations so that we identify which cues are the most relevant for each outcome. That way, when we've established which words are the most informative for which verb, then we can actually use that to teach learners how to pick the correct verb.
Associative learning is any learning process in which a new response, in our case the outcomes start and begin, are associated with a stimulus, in our case a cue, so the sentence and all the words that make up that sentence. Associative learning has been mathematically expressed through a rule called Rescorla-Wagner. So the Rescorla-Wagner rule tries to explain the process of learning in terms of weight. So a weight is the strength of association between a cue I and an outcome J. And what it says is that in the future, so at time t plus 1, the strength of association is equal to the strength at the previous time step plus delta W, which is the rate of change. Now, how do we define this rate of change? Now, using this formula, we're going to do some calculations. Pretty simple.
I would like to see the results of our research applied in actual classroom teaching. So I would really love it if some of the things that we have found, some of the classroom materials that we have designed would be used in teaching English as a foreign language or Polish as a foreign language.
Some teachers in China, there is just tells the L2 learner, and you can recite this rule, and it can help you understand and help you to choose the good answer and correct answer in the test. However, this is not a good way to help the learners deeply understand and really understand what's the temporal information in the test, and they can deeply understand the situation model in their mind. So in my research, I would like to contribute to the teachers and the alto learner to help them improve the ways to deeply understand the temporal information.
Ideally, this will, like our findings in terms of teaching of foreign languages, will make their way through to schools and teachers of foreign languages at whatever level they may be it like secondary schools or higher education. And hopefully this will be researched even more in linguistics in general as well, and second language acquisition.
Regardless of where you are, the country or the place or the context that someone is learning a language, I would like to have all this kind of tips and techniques related to technology and individual differences to be applicable in class, so that when someone is actually learning a language, he or she learns effectively and in an easy way, comparing to a traditional way that is unfortunately still applicable in today's classrooms.
For the current stage, I'm doing data analysis. Before that, I collected enough eye movement data from both Chinese readers and English readers. And currently, I'm analyzing those data to compare how they read differently. I use English native speakers' eye movement as the optimal way, so I compare how these reading eye movements are different, so as to find a better way to help Chinese English as a foreign language learners to read English more fluently and more confidently.
Moving our more experimental lab knowledge into the classroom, setting up classroom interventions, or as some people in psychology would call field experiments. So you have less of control, but you have actually greater ecological validity. You actually test that against people who will really need to do something, whatever that be, in our particular case, learning language. So we are probing what we learned previously via computational simulations, via experiments, and trying in the classroom in specific ways so that it's accessible to students to actually learn and apply that knowledge in the future.
We are trying to merge learning and linguistics, like using insights from both, which hasn't been done as much as one would have hoped, and hopefully that will lead to more research and more exciting findings in this field.
You already made me laugh. Serious?
That was really good.
Okay, so we can keep. I want to do that.
I was born a stand-up comedian.
Yeah, I can tell.
Yeah.
Thank you.